thank you for the best question ever. I mean, there's lots of other great questions, of course, but that was a great question. Yeah, so sometimes we do get stuck in something called punctiliar or a snapshot. You know, like what would your life look like if all you had to go with is one photograph? They wouldn't tell you very much about your life. But if somebody could watch a movie about your life, even if it was kind of broad strokes, this is what, okay, so now I have a lot more to go in. So sometimes in lots of different subjects, like theology or philosophy in particular, it helps if you can kind of talk through the whole process from start to finish. Okay, that's starting to make more sense. Yeah. And a smaller answer to your question about the human condition and what does it take to bring us out of the kind of habits that make trouble for us and our neighbor is a real simple example is texting while you drive. It is illegal, correct? Okay, presumably for good reasons. Are people still texting? Are there statistics about what happens when people text and drive? So why are there still people that are texting while they drive when we know these things? So the question is, what does it take to get a particular human being to be convinced enough to change their behavior permanently, right? So no matter what day, no matter what's going on in my life, no matter how important something might be coming on my phone that buzzes or whatever to tell me I have a text, I'm not going to see it if I'm still driving. What would it take? Tragedy?
Well, for people in AA, it takes them like to find spiritual guidance and to be able to have somebody to relate to, I guess. So even then, a lot of them fail at trying to get out of it. So
okay, so there's a parallel experience, right? How bad does it have to be before an alcoholic stops pursuing alcoholic behavior?
Well, I mean,
just the sight of death, catastrophic, sometimes that's not enough to go back. That's an example, right? But do you suppose that there could be a person who, while they were texting, caused an accident, and that wasn't good, but maybe nobody was hurt or hurt badly, okay, so they go back to driving again. Will they text again? Maybe, probably, there's probably statistics about this too. And what would they tell themselves about it? So I picked up my phone and then something said, yeah, but remember the last time you did this, there was an accident. But then another part of me says, well, that was last time. They probably won't. So these kinds of voices are going on. What if you seriously injured a person? Would that be enough to do it? Or would you go back? What if you killed a person? Would that be enough to never go back to doing it? And that's just having to do with texting. So when you think of the broader spectrum of human misconduct, let's just call it like that, what would it take, in my experience going forward, to never return to any form of misconduct in thoughts, words, or deeds? So we think about human history. Hasn't there been enough human history of pain and suffering for the whole human family on the planet starting today to never do those sorts of things again? Well, apparently not, right? So some of us rather stupidly now, I feel foolish going through the late 50s, early 60s, through all of the racial turmoil in the United States to get out of segregation and go towards integration and making things equitable for everyone and really just embracing everybody that's in the United States. Here we all are, human beings. So into the 70s and 80s, I feel stupid now, but I kind of thought we were getting somewhere. And then, you know, in the 2020s, here we got people getting killed again for the wrong reasons. And, oh my gosh, we're not getting anywhere. How can that go on? And then there's no upside of that sort of thing in repeating this history. You know, you have this fellow in North Korea. What's that about? You know, there's still somebody here that thinks they're going to take over the world. I grew up with James Bond movies. I know that's not happening. It never, ever works. Doesn't work in human history either. So thanks for a great question, because it has important ramifications for us. By the way, I have your New Testament thing here after class. If you want yours, I'll be happy to give it to you, and then you can see how you did and let me know if you got more questions. So we're talking about love. It's all, they say it's all right once you get past the pain, you'll find yourself in love again. In love again. So where did the pain come from? So presumably you were in love, and then something happened, and then there was pain. But you'll find yourself in love again. But that makes me wonder if that this time won't also be followed with pain. So is there something necessarily, it's just inevitable that if you're in love, there's going to be pain? Any of you know about the history of pain management in medicine? It's an interesting parallel, right? The present day medical approach to pain is, what's our level of tolerance from the medical community? I want to know 1 to 10, Angela, what's your pain? You'd say 4, and we'd say our goal is, I'm sorry? Yeah, but our goal is 0. It's interesting that medicine didn't sort of just say, well, everybody's in some kind of pain, so let's just get you close enough. But they actually go for 0 and advances in studies. And I mean, some people out there are determined to do something about this, not just coexist with it kind of a thing, right? So maybe if that's possible in human physiology, is it possible in human relationships? So if we talk about love for one another, does it have to be painful, or is it possible that it could actually be just good, always good? If it's authentic, if it's genuine, I don't know. So here's this whole chapter on it, 1 Corinthians 13. So we need to have a look. Fortunately, today we go from 1 Corinthians to 2 Corinthians, and one follows the other. So if you get to 1 Corinthians 13, you're in a good place. Without even looking, arguably, the most abused word in the English language. There's probably lots of them, but what?
Oh,
It's a 4-letter word. Love, right? Why am I suggesting that that's a word that's abused in? Can you give us an example?
I love sushi, but I also love that.
There you go. Okay, so it has, not surprisingly, in the corruption in human nature, co-ops things. You know that word, co-op? So you come to something that has one purpose, but you co-opt it and you make it act for another purpose, right? So knives have a good purpose for certain things that we need to get done. And sometimes violent people co-opt that and use it for bad purpose, kind of a thing. Okay, so love, there's something inside of us that says we're supposed to be loving, but what really appeals to me is the idea that I love something means that has to do with what it does for me, not what I do for it. So I love breakfast cereal, I love pizza, I love my car, and I love my girlfriend because of what she provides for my life, not because of what I provide for hers.
Aren't there different types of love though? Is that why it's most overused because it's pathos earlier?
Well, that's a good question. Okay, so let's go to Greek that has 4 kinds of love. So whether it's love of family, or whether it's friendship, or whether it's sacrificial, all of those still selfish or selfless? Selfless. This is all me on behalf of my family, me on behalf of my friend, me on behalf of the other person I'm going to sacrifice my life for. What about eros? So that's the physical, romantic, physiological love. All of a sudden, should we change our thinking and say, no, that one's for me? Or would that also be on behalf of you? In other words, if this, whatever level of romance we're talking about here, or intimacy, that would still that's still supposed to be for the good of the other person, yes? Yeah, okay, so in no cases, no matter which kind of love we're talking about, is it okay for me to make it selfish? Right, because selfishness is fundamentally the problem, and that's what co-opts all these different things that are going on in the world and make them trouble instead of helpful. But we're back to what kind of mindset are we functioning with? So if I have this sense of time passing, and I can't think, at least I'm not thinking beyond a material existence, it does make sense that I would be a taker rather than a giver. Yes, like the drowning person. So it's understandable, even if it's not good. Faith, hope, and love, he says at the end of the chapter, these three abide, but the greatest of these is love. Anybody know why that is? Faith, hope, love, right? The greatest of these is love. Why not faith and hope?
Isn't that for like what it can do for you? Not what you can do.
That's part, yep. So far,
It's also
okay.
a matter of, like, I'm thinking that really-
Okay, good. So if we think about hope, hope is, you know what that is. Hope is looking forward to, having a positive expectation for something important to happen, right? Like what? Like love. Faith, if it's honesty about dependence, okay, does it matter if love is there for me to depend on? So this is the stable, this is sort of the aggregate of life, and that's what we look forward to, and it's what we depend on. That's why, and so of course, the New Testament says that God is love. So that's always there, which makes hope and faith possible. But I did want to look at the text with you for a minute and actually give it a read. Tammy, can you just give that whole chunk of read for us?
Love suffers long, is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not carry itself. Is not puffed up. Does not behave rudely. Does not seek its own. Is not provoked. Thinks no evil. Does not rejoice and rejoices in the truth. Bears all things. Is honest about dependence on all things. Hopes all things. Endure all things. Love never fails.
Okay, so in the context talking about love, there's the hope and honesty about dependence, there's the faith part. But right in the middle of that long list, there's our definition for love. Love does not seek its own. So what would have to be true before a person could be loving in this way? What would you have to know or be convinced of if you were going to not be seeking for yourself anymore, not thinking of myself anymore? I'm not trying to satisfy myself anymore. I'm not trying to have my way anymore. All of the selfishness has passed. Now my mind is on everyone around. What would have to be true for that to be the case?
Is this like in the context of a loving relationship?
Sure.
You probably have to have faith in the partner that they will take care of your needs, not for you, but that they love you well and that's supporting you in that, so that you can do the same for them and everyone else.
Okay, so there's the beginning of let's say a conviction that I can be all in for the sake of others, and that's not going to be the end of me, correct? So these other people or someone somewhere is going to be doing what I'm not thinking about doing for myself anymore. Right? So if we have a room full of 20 people drowning, which one of you is going to stop drowning and start saving the others? Well, you'd have to be not drowning first, right? You'd have to be actually not just an okay swimmer, but a capable swimmer. You'd have to have some kind of confidence that you have the strength and the skills and the ability and the passion to save every single one of these other people, and you're going to work at that one at a time, yeah? So I'm gonna pull Ruby out, I'm gonna get her, set her down on the beach. Ruby, please don't get back in the water, just give me a minute. Then I'm gonna get Angela and just keep going. Okay, so in a larger way, if you had a conviction that God makes everything work together for your good, That God who makes your heart beat, there's a witness there, a constant witness. God who makes your respiration go and the world turns sunshine, food grows. All of your physiology functions without you making it do what it does. And there's also a witness in our design, right? That our arms and legs go out from us, not in. That our eyes see out, our ears hear what's outside of us, noses, okay, tastes. Okay, so there's a witness here, God saying, you don't have to worry about yourself. You go ahead and be concerned about the well-being of other people, and I'll make sure that everything gets done for you. So there is hope for love in our lives, but that love depends on a conviction that people would have to be made aware of, not just aware of, but actually be made convinced of, right? Presumably, people that go to Christian churches have read this, are familiar with this, yes? Yeah, the whole love thing, right? Okay, but this is at the center of it, really, isn't it? If you're not seeking your own, then you would be patient, and then you would be kind, and you would not be provoked, because you're always thinking about the other person, not about myself. How many weddings have this as a text? Not any? Lots of them. I've been there for lots and lots and lots of them. So you have two people who say they're going to be committed to each other, and they want to hear this text. They want other people to hear the text, right? So going forward, the two of you are never going to be selfish, right? That usually doesn't even make it to the reception before that's coming apart. Okay, so how to understand that? Well, what if we had two natures? What if we did have a nature, the essence of who we are, that was convinced of these things? The problem is it lives inside a nature that thinks very differently, right? So have you ever felt hungry? Yes? Okay. Does that hunger drive you to focus? Like the only thing I can think about now is making that sensation go away. You know what hangry is, right? Okay, I don't want to be an angry person, but I'm a function of hunger that has control over me. Okay, so there it is. Is it impossible for us to actually transcend hunger, to not be hangry, when that's what we feel like being? Something could inspire you to do better than that, couldn't you? Don't you suppose there are people, I don't know, school teachers or medical people or military people, firefighters who dismiss those sensations of hunger or thirst or fatigue even, right? Why? Because I can't think about that. Why? Because there's something more important at stake, like the lives of other people. So that's 1 Corinthians 13. That would be good, something worth pursuing. Next, chapter 14. So there it is, 14. This is like a bowl of spaghetti, in my experience. Did this go around? No. So it's a mess. And when you find a bowl of spaghetti, or if you had a pile of wires that were all like a bowl of spaghetti, or you have a text like this, you're just going to have to commit to taking the time to untangle it all. So spending the time with this text, what became obvious the more times I read it over and over and over again, is that there was a contrast going on, between speaking in tongues as the Corinthians were experiencing it and prophesying. Okay. So speaking of tongues, if you think back to Acts 2, right, and the apostles were speaking in the languages, the native languages of the people who were from all kinds of different places in the Roman Empire, all of them Jews, so maybe they still had Hebrew, all of them in the Roman Empire, so they all spoke Greek, but God making a witness that he cares about who, every single people group, makes that witness by speaking to them in their particular language. Actually, the Greek word's dialect, in that place. Okay, so working way through Acts, you get to see the purpose of speaking in languages, which was to convince or to give a witness both to God's love for everybody and to the immediacy of how God's message works. In other words, you're already saved, and when you hear about having already been saved, the message itself works conviction in you. It regenerates the soul and so forth. Well, in Corinth, not surprisingly, the ability to speak in different languages was being co-opted. So remember the Corinthians, that they were competing with each other? Right? I'm a better Christian than you are because I follow Paul, or I follow Peter, or I follow Jesus. So not surprisingly, they were claiming to be speaking in languages, and that makes me a better Christian than you. God likes me better because, okay, so Paul teases this out. Okay, all the way down through the list, back and forth, he's talking about speaking the truth and communicating grace, the truth about grace to other people. Look at what's the same here, right? So there's edification, an edifice. That's the face of a building. So edification means to build someone up. Okay, so pursue love, right? And we're going to, because of love, we're going to say what we say for the good, for the well-being of other people. Edification edifies for the better, right? So that edification takes place. So unless I speak words of revelation now, it's probably teaching words easy to understand for the benefit of the listener. Over here, we got the self that's getting in the way, right? So selfishness is at least confusing, if not undermining, the purpose of spiritual gifts in general and of speaking in languages in particular. Okay, so there's the point of it. Speaking in languages to authenticate the apostles, to authenticate that the gospel is for all people, to authenticate the indwelling of the Holy Spirit in the listeners, the people who heard. Questions? One more, well, almost one more. So 1 Corinthians 15 is devoted to the subject of the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. So think about that. If Paul expects the Corinthians actually to begin to function according to a regenerate soul, which means I'm actually going to actively love other people, then I'm going to have to be convinced that that's the way to go. That I'm not going to die in the course of doing that. I'm actually going to experience what life is. That would mean I have to have confidence about who my life depends on. Well, if my life's going to depend on Jesus, it's going to matter that he rose from the dead. So think about it, right? If Jesus didn't rise from the dead and I'm going to be a disciple of Jesus, what do I have to look forward to? Well, I look forward to people being against me and finding a way to arrest me and terminate me. So it's sort of like saying I'm going to fight big corporations and the way they deal with people. Okay? How successful might I be in that? Likely not that successful. Okay, and what would I have to show for it? And then it's over. Okay, so I wanted you to have a chance to see the text again. So we better do this maybe a verse apiece. So Parker, can you do verse 3?
I delivered to you first of all that which I also received, that Christ died for our sins according to the scripture.
And Ross, verse 4.
And that he was buried and that he rose again the third day according to the scripture.
Julie?
And that he was seen by Cephas,
Yeah, Cephas.
and then by the 12.
Yeah, who's Cephas, Julie? That's Aramaic, actually, for Petros, which is Greek for rock, which that's how you get Peter. Grace?
After that, he was seen by over 500 brothers of whom the greater part of the league was present, but some people asleep.
And Angela?
After that, he was seen by James.
Say it real?
Then last of all, he was seen by me also as well known then.
Andrea?
And if Christ is not risen, then was tempting me.
Joe? Verse 15. Here.
Yes, and we are found false, witnesses of God because we have testified of God and that, or sorry, that he raised up Christ, whom he did not raise up, if in fact the dead do not
Rise. Christian?
rise.
Or if the dead are not raised, not even Christ has been raised.
Okay,
And if Christ is not risen, faith is futile, you are still in his.
and 18.
But I'm also raised up all my sleep in Christ.
Garrett?
In this life, only we have hope in Christ. We are not of all men the most.
We are of all men the most pitiable, yes, and Indy?
But in fact, Christ has been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep.
Oh, yeah, right, sorry, I didn't make the leap with you. So Priscilla, 29.
Otherwise, if you do what you are able to outside from the dead, if the dead does not rise at all. Why then are they baptized for the dead?
And one more, Tyler.
And why do we stand in jeopardy of now?
Okay, so I took a couple jumps through the text to get you through the main strokes of it. Okay, so first of all is the evidence of the witnesses. So over the course of 40 days, up to 500 people at the same time. Acts referred to Jesus eating and drinking with them, so not a ghost or a phantasm or something like that, so forth. Okay. Second of all is Paul's reflection on how pitiable we would be if that wasn't the case. So if we were just pretending that Jesus rose from the dead, but he didn't, then people should pity us because we're devoting our lives to something that's not true, and we're going to die and it's going to be over. And what was the point of that exercise, right? And then they're in jeopardy for having this teaching, so they're being pursued and persecuted. Okay, and then what about even pagans believe in the resurrection of the dead because pagans have practices of baptizing people for the dead. So there is evidence around the world through all kinds of different cultures that there's at least a suspicion that there's life after death. And therefore we take some care for and care about those people who have preceded us in death, hoping that they have a good experience, hoping that we can help them if there's a way to do that. That's what baptism for the dead is for, and hoping to have a good experience there ourselves. Okay, and then a witness in nature. So is there any parallel, anything like death and resurrection in nature? Yeah, you do it yourself once a day usually. So you sleep, and then you rise, and then you do it again over and over again. Not so much in California, but north of here and other places, right? You have the winter, things look dead, and in some cases they're functionally almost dead, but then spring comes, and even the rhythm between night and day, from death to resurrection, from cold to warmth, from death to life, and so forth. Okay, 1 Corinthians 15. And then one more, I just couldn't resist. 1 Corinthians 16, verse 20. Casey, do you have that?
All the brothers then greet one another with a holy kiss.
Greet one another with a holy kiss. Has anybody experienced that practice in Christian churches in the United States? Moving, no? No, I haven't. Okay, now interestingly, it's an imperative. So this is the New Testament speaking to people that are interested in it, and it's a command. Greet not one another, not just with a kiss, but with a. So what would that look like? Can someone demonstrate? That would be awkward, at least, right? So, well, somebody, let's have a volunteer. Yeah, Christian, come on up here. No, I'm just, I don't want to be awkward. Okay. Yet, if you've been to Italy or Spain or the south of France, how do people greet one another?
This is on cheap.
And is that awkward or weird or uncomfortable? Even on the East Coast of the United States, that was a new learning experience for me, but it's often the same practice there. And it's not even like weird, like you have to figure it out. But when you greet someone, people will offer you their cheek. Not bad, right? And from a hygiene standpoint, which do you think is maybe a better way to go? The handshake or the kiss on the cheek? I mean, Right, that's our practice, all this handshaking going on all the time. But isn't that a nightmare for epidemiologists? This is right, because what are people doing in their hands? And then I'm going to put my hand on your hand, you're going to put your hand on her hand. Pretty soon the whole room's infected. That's not correct. So interestingly, so context-wise, right, at this time in world history, like people still in the Mediterranean regions today, right, even outside of Europe, it's customary to greet people with a kiss. Does anybody know the history of the handshake? It actually has history too. You know? In medieval times, putting your hand out like this meant that I'm offering you friendship, because what isn't in my hand? The sword. There's no weapon in my hand, so I'm showing you. Don't ask about this one, but okay. So I'm showing you. So okay, so now we have a context here for a conversation or for some kind of cooperation that we're going to do. Have you ever met someone that offered to shake your hand like this? You know what that's about? Power. That's been my experience with it, as opposed to a person would offer this hand. Garrett.
So I just took a class on like the theory of how you can't do a proper handshake. So you shake someone's hand neutral and then you rotate it, you're showing them dominance. So if a guy is being their significant other's father, you should not roll. You should allow them to roll your hand. And even though they didn't do it on purpose, you're still going to internally feel like they have power over you.
Yeah.
And
I don't know. So I don't know, the fist pump, maybe that's problematic, because fists are not usually, I don't know, maybe we should go with the kiss. I don't know. You heard about hugs too, right? There's hug studies, 38 levels of hugs. There's the Lutheran hug, like this, and then, all kinds of levels too. Yeah. Okay, anyway, just interesting to know about that when you read texts in biblical narratives or teachings, you don't necessarily have to just dismiss them. So I do think it's something that Christian churches could do some thinking about, like when we greet each other, what really is that? Is it a formality? Is there some kind of actual witness to authenticity? Yeah, so one more example of that. So it's been in my lifetime that Lutheran churches started pausing during a service to greet one another. Sometimes it happens in chapel, go to chapel, okay? Historically speaking, Lutherans don't like to do this, okay? It's an interruption. I'm going to have to say hello to people that I may not have chosen to sit next to. That's not something that comes naturally to us, but we're trying to warm up to the idea, okay? But we don't like it, and the sooner it's over, the better. So that's usually like a minute or less. I used to fill in at an all African American congregation, actually two different ones in South Chicago, and it was a beautiful experience, because when we got to that part, so they're all Lutherans too, but when we got to that part of the service, it's like a half an hour before we get back to what we were doing, because they actually were determined to take time, right? To say, Parker, I haven't seen you all week, buddy, how's it going? And listen, ask about your family, and then we gotta, it's just wonderful thing to see. So when you take the clock out of the equation and you really do care about these other people, it was a great experience, even with the handshake going on. All right, after 1 Corinthians, guess what? 2 Corinthians, remember, like Thessalonians, spring and fall of the same year. So Thessalonians on the second missionary journey of Paul in 51. This is on the third missionary journey of Paul. So Paul's gone up and around the Aegean Sea and down through Greece to Corinth, and then he's crossed the sea again, come back to Ephesus, and he's writing back, much like the other letters. There's trouble there, and so we need to write back there and see if we can help. So remember, 1 Corinthians is dealing with a whole sequence of problems, from taking each other to court, to sexual immorality, to competitiveness and divisions and all those sorts of things. So there is some good coming, apparently, from them receiving 1 Corinthians. And now Paul is following up to try and help that good direction along. So 2 Corinthians has it's almost unparalleled in the Bible in its focus on something that all of us need much of the time, if not all the time. Anybody in the room dying right now? Thank you. That's a good answer. Anybody more than just the normal progression of life in gravity? It could be true. I've had students in the past who had leukemia, things like that. No? Okay. Now, this is probably a different level, right? Any of you have a loved one that's in the process of actually in decline physically? Yeah? Okay. Any of you living in anxiety, worry, or fear about your own death or the death of someone you care about? Thoughts about that, fears, concerns, okay? So taking a New Testament perspective now, we're going to look at these words again, right? So thinking, what is death really? Are some people functionally or by way of relationships, are they dead even while they live, right? And is it possible that some people are alive even though they die? That's the idea of that eternal life, the life of the soul and the anticipation of and looking the hope. Here we go, the hope for the resurrection of the dead, recreation of a perfect body, reunited with the soul going on to eternity. So this letter, 2 Corinthians, is going to work on how we think about these things. Yeah, can we read through this? So we read, Priscilla, Tammy, will you read number 1, please?
What to expect when so many voices are determined to contradict God's design and hardens hearts.
Okay, so we looked at that a little bit in Thessalonians. So forces determined to contradict God's design. We see that in the world around us. We see it through history. It's in the news. It's part of our own relationships. Even when we want to love another person, we find ourselves undermining that with thoughtless words or actions or thoughts. Okay, and now God's inspiring us to love rather than be selfish. That's going to meet with opposition. Okay, Parker, number 2.
To learn who we can or should trust.
Okay, so have any of you had experiences where you were determined and you felt very confident about your own abilities and then were disappointed with that? Okay, so then what? So maybe you deal with the disappointment and kind of time lets you become optimistic again or want to try again. Something's motivating you to try again, but will I do any better the next time? The question behind all of that is there someone or something beyond me, besides me, beneath me, that I can have confidence in, that I can trust to provide for my life? Number 3, Ross.
How would we come to know God best?
Mhm.
If he always made our life as we wished,
B.
if he always responded when as we direct him, or if he sustains and even enhances our life, especially when all things are against us.
Okay, so if he always made our life as we wish, are there people in the world who always get what they want? Do they tend to be the happiest people? No. And they make movies about it, right? So presumably, Jasmine, inside the palace, got everything she wanted except for one thing. What couldn't she get, Catalina? You look knowing. What wasn't she allowed to wish for?
Rather than like the Disney princess.
Yeah. Yeah, with the big tiger friend. Yeah. What wasn't she allowed to do? You guys know the story.
She has her own husband.
Well, even before that, she can't leave. She's not allowed to leave so both she and Aladdin said they were trapped, but in very vastly different ways, right? For different reasons. Okay. Always responded the way we direct them. That's the problem with the genie. So even when Aladdin had the genie, that didn't solve the problems for him. So what about another possibility? What about someone or something that purposely waits until our thinking about ourselves and our abilities, especially our abilities to control or to know best, are exhausted, and then solves the problem for us? Okay. And then number 4, Julie.
What if heaven is not the change of circumstances outside of us within this position?
Yes, it's just only that much. Have you ever thought of that before? So when we think about heaven, sometimes we think about the word paradise, and we think about the all-inclusive resort. Have you been to one? No? They're nice. Yeah, Cancun, weather's beautiful, the water's clear. Look at Garrett smile. I just love that, Garrett.
If you're old enough to drink it.
Yeah, if you're old enough to drink. But you know what I discovered the hard way? I'm drinking, but you know what they make the ice cubes out of? The water you're not supposed to, at least that was my experience. Yeah, you can't make ice cubes out of alcohol. Not good alcohol. Okay, anyway, okay. So we sort of tend to think that heaven has to do with everything being just how I want it. But what if that's still not heaven? Because there are people who have everything just the way they want it and they're still not happy. In fact, they're worse than that. So what if it wasn't a change necessarily of what's going on, but our disposition towards it? And I don't mean what's going on in terms of horrific kinds of things, of the abuse of people, but just sort of an average day, right? Where I can't get my laptop to do what it's supposed to, or all the lights are red, right? What we normally would consider just a bad day. What if heaven isn't because all the lights are green? It's just I have a different attitude about things that I encountered in the course of my life. Anybody familiar with Buddhism? That's Buddhism. What the Buddha was teaching was saying your problem with suffering is because you want something that life isn't about. If you change what you think life is about, all of a sudden you're not suffering anymore. Taoism is a variation of that, right? Tao is so if you just kind of go with the flow, that's where that saying came from, then you wouldn't be aggravated about things all of the time. So maybe it's a dispositional change. Similarly, what if hell was the final abandonment of a person to having their own way? So you can have your own way, but you'll find yourself alone. Right? I have visited over my lifetime many elderly people who are alone and intensely unhappy. They're bitter and resentful and angry and most of all lonely. And in each case, I could discover the reason for that. Do you know why they are that way? Because they have to be in control of everything. So they don't want anybody visiting them that they don't like. They don't want anybody doing anything while they're visiting that they don't like. They want everything just how they have it. So much so that it doesn't have room for any people. So what if you reverse that? Say, no, I'm just happy to have whatever comes my way. That's what children do for you. All right, so we got to go back to this. So let's have a look at the text, 2 Corinthians 1, starting at verse 7. Grace, please, if you have it. I'm sorry, Grace, verse 3. We need to do that first. 2 Corinthians 1, verse 3.
God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and God of all comfort.
And Angela, verse 4.
Who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble, but comfort we ourselves receive from Him.
Yes. Okay. So there is something about that, isn't it? A person who's been through something themselves that you're going through has an advantage in terms of comforting you. Yes. Most effective people, Christian, the most effective people that work with alcoholics are those that have recovered from alcoholism. Okay, so what's Paul saying here? He's just making that broad across our whole life. God is leading you through situations and circumstances and experiences and supporting you through those, not just to get you to the other side of them, but so you actually know how to help the next person that's going through that kind of thing. Sometimes it means putting a spot of water on your hands because that's what another person is concerned about. Do you ever know about kids? Kids are scared to get shots. They won't do it. Do you know that you can go with them and you can let the physician give you a shot first? And they'll just give you a saline solution, but it helps the kid to say, oh, well, you didn't cry or swat at the doctor, so I got a chance to do that once. I used to visit women who had suffered miscarriages, but I visited them very differently after my wife and I had. miscarriage. So lots of different things. I visited burn victims in the hospital. It was different after I was a burn victim. So on and on and on it goes. Right? So that's partially what's going on in 2 Corinthians. Let's go on to verse 7 then. Say real.
Our hope for you is unshaken, for we know that as you share in our sufferings, you will also share in our comfort.
Andrea?
We do not want you to be uninformed, brothers and sisters, about the troubles we experienced in the province of Asia. We were under great pressure, far beyond our ability to endure, so that we despaired of life itself.
And Bill, verse 9.
Indeed, we felt that we had received the sentence of death, but that was to make us rely not only on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead.
Okay, so Gil, they had that experience so that what? Sorry. So they would learn something too. To be honest about their dependence on God rather than on themselves. And that's the way forward here. Okay, we'll finish 2 Corinthians on Friday. If you want your Scantron, come on up and I'll get it for you. Let me get it there. Let's make sure and let me know if you want to talk about this or. I saw you jumping way up in the on the bar. I was impressed. You can, yeah, I mean, I'd like it back, but you can keep it as long as you need. You want to look at the test? Yeah, yeah, okay. Yeah. Parker? Yeah. Yes, I did.
Actually.
No, it's just ice cream.
Oh, just cake.
Yeah.
I was gonna say fruit cake is not right.
No.
The class was probably nice.
Oh, yeah. It was probably.
We're lucky if I